The day a man in a pressed linen shirt and a Panama hat drove his vintage car straight through my iron gate. He didn't just break metal and stone. He kicked open something I'd kept sealed for a long time, and somehow, by the end of it all, he lost a whole lot more than I ever did. See, I've lived on this corner a lot longer than most people in this neighborhood have been alive, back when this wasn't a subdivision with matching mailboxes and HOA newsletters, just open land, gravel roads, and enough quiet to hear yourself think. I bought the place in '88 for acres of uneven ground, oak trees that leaned like old men, and a dirt driveway that turned to mud every time it rained. But it was mine, and over the years I built it up piece by piece, slow and steady, like most things that actually last. The iron gate came later, early '90s, welded by a guy named Curtis who smoked too much and talked even more. But he knew his craft, and those stone pillars, those were my wife Linda's idea, said every home deserves something that feels like a welcome and a boundary at the same time. She planted the boxwood hedge herself, hands in the dirt, humming under her breath, and in '96 she painted that little wooden sign with our last name in soft blue letters, said it didn't need to be perfect, just needed to feel like us. And for nearly 30 years, it did. Every morning, same routine, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watch the lights stretch across the gravel, hear the distant hum of people starting their days, and I guess I figured things like that don't change unless you let them. Turns out, sometimes change doesn't ask. That morning started no different, quiet, a little breeze moving through the trees. I remember thinking the air smelled like rain even though the sky was clear, and then I heard it. Not loud at first, just the kind of engine you don't hear often anymore. Something older, heavier, like it had stories of its own. I leaned forward in my chair just in time to see this dark green '68 Chevy Bel Air swing wide at the entrance of the subdivision, tires crunching gravel, and for a split second I thought maybe the driver just misjudged the turn. But then the car didn't correct. It kept coming, straight toward my gate like it had made up its mind. There's a strange kind of silence right before impact, like the world pulls its breath in, and I remember setting my coffee down real slow, not rushing, not shouting, just watching, and then metal screamed. The left pillar took the first hit, stone cracking like a gunshot. The gate twisted inward, hinges snapping loose, the boxwood flattened under the front end, and that sign, Linda's sign, spun off into the ditch like it weighed nothing at all. The car stopped halfway through what used to be my entrance, engine ticking, a little smoke curling from under the hood, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then the door opened, and out stepped the man responsible, calm as if he'd just parked at a grocery store, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve, adjusting that hat like appearances still mattered. I walked down the driveway, gravel crunching under my boots, not fast, not slow, just steady. And when I got close enough, I saw his front fender crumpled, chrome bent in on itself, and I thought, well, at least he's going to apologize. That seemed like a reasonable place for things to begin. Instead, he looked at me, then at the gate, then back at me, and said, "You know this isn't supposed to be here, right?" Just like that. No hesitation, no acknowledgement of what he'd done, just a statement, flat and certain, like he was correcting a mistake I'd made. I didn't answer right away, mostly because I was trying to decide if I'd heard him correctly, and behind him a couple of neighbors had started gathering on the sidewalk, drawn in by the noise, whispering, watching, the way people do when something doesn't fit the usual pattern of their day. I glanced past him at the damage, the broken stone, the bent iron, the empty space where that sign used to hang, and something in my chest tightened. Not anger exactly. Not yet. More like a slow pressure building, the kind that takes its time. That gate's been there over 30 years, I finally said, keeping my voice even, long before this neighborhood had a name. He gave a short laugh, shook his head, and pulled out his phone like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Well, that's part of the problem," he said, already dialing. "Because as of now, it's in violation. You're encroaching on community access land, and I'm not about to be liable for damage caused by something that shouldn't exist." I remember blinking at that, just once, slow, like my brain needed a second to catch up with the sheer confidence of what he was saying. And that's when one of the neighbors, Mrs. Caldwell, leaned over her fence and muttered, "Oh boy, he picked the wrong driveway today." I didn't know it yet, but she was right, just not in the way she thought. The man stepped a few feet away, speaking into his phone in that clipped, official tone, mentioning code enforcement, unauthorized structures, liability claims, all the right words lined up in the right order. And as I stood there looking at what used to be my gate, I realized something simple and very clear. This wasn't about an accident anymore. This was about a man who believed the rules only worked one way. And for the first time in a long while, I found myself wondering what would happen if they didn't. So I turned, walked back up the driveway, and headed inside. Not to cool off, not to avoid the situation, but because I knew exactly where something was that he hadn't even thought to ask about yet. And that, more than anything, is where things started to shift. Inside the house, everything felt exactly the same as it had 10 minutes earlier. Quiet, still, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air, and for a second I just stood there by the door, listening to the muffled voices outside, the low hum of a situation that was already getting bigger than it needed to be. And I remember thinking how strange it is that a place can hold so much history and yet be completely indifferent to whatever storm is happening just beyond its walls. I walked over to the hallway closet, reached up to the top shelf, and pulled down the small fireproof lockbox I hadn't opened in a while, not because I didn't need what was inside, but because some things you only touch when you absolutely have to, documents that carry weight beyond paper, beyond ink. As I set it on the table and spun the dial, I could hear his voice outside getting louder, more performative now that he had an audience. Words like liability and non-compliance floating in through the open window, and it struck me that he wasn't just trying to win an argument. He was trying to establish authority. That kind of thing usually works, too, especially in neighborhoods like this, where most folks would rather nod and comply than get tangled up in something official. The lock clicked open, and I lifted the lid, flipping past old insurance papers, Linda's handwritten notes tucked between envelopes, and finally found what I was looking for: the deed, the original survey, and a set of recorded easement documents I hadn't thought about in years, mostly because there had never been a reason to. Until now. By the time I stepped back outside, the scene had grown, a small cluster of neighbors standing at a careful distance, the man in the Panama hat pacing near his car, phone in hand, and just as I reached the bottom of the driveway, another vehicle pulled up, county code enforcement, right on cue. The officer stepped out, a woman maybe in her 40s, composed, efficient, the kind of presence that doesn't raise its voice but doesn't need to either, and she took one look at the situation before asking, "All right, who called this in?" He raised his hand immediately, walking toward her with the confidence of someone who assumes the outcome is already decided. "I did," he said, gesturing toward my gate. "This structure is illegally placed on community access land, and it caused significant damage to my vehicle." She nodded once, neutral, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just processing, and then turned to me. "Sir, is this your property?" I handed her the deed without a word, and she took it, flipping it open with practiced ease. What followed was quiet, almost methodical. She walked the perimeter, measuring while clicking softly against the gravel, occasionally glancing down at the survey map, aligning lines and numbers with what was physically there, while the man trailed behind her, offering commentary she didn't ask for, pointing things out that didn't need pointing. "You can see right there," he said at one point, tapping his foot near the edge of the driveway. "That's clearly part of the access strip." She didn't respond, just kept measuring, and I could feel the tension shifting, not breaking, just stretching, like something about to give. When she finally stopped, she marked a point near the base of the damaged pillar, checked it against the survey again, and then looked up. "The gate is 14 feet inside your deeded boundary," she said plainly, directing it more toward him than me. "It does not encroach on community property." There was a small pause after that, the kind that usually signals the end of a dispute, but he didn't accept it, not even close. "That's not possible," he said, shaking his head. "The HOA records show." "I'm working off the county plat," she interrupted, still calm, still even. "And according to that, there's no violation here." I watched his expression shift, not to doubt, but to something sharper, more defensive, like the idea of being wrong wasn't something he entertained, just something he needed to push past. "Then there's an easement," he said quickly, grasping for ground. "Utility access, community infrastructure, that gate interferes with it." And that was the moment I'd been waiting for. I stepped forward, holding out the additional documents, the easement agreement folded neatly behind the deed. There is an easement, I said, my voice steady. 12 feet wide. Runs along the northeast corner, been there since before the subdivision was built. The officer took the papers, scanning them carefully, and I could see the exact second she found the clause, her eyes slowing, focusing, reading it again, just to be sure. This easement includes a termination provision, she said, more to herself than anyone else. In the event of a materially false claim of encroachment filed by an HOA officer. She didn't finish the sentence out loud. Didn't need to, because we all understood where it was going. He didn't, not yet. Or maybe he did, and just refused to accept it. That's irrelevant, he said, a little too quickly. I filed a legitimate concern based on the information available. I met his gaze then, not angry, not raised, just certain. You filed it as the acting president of the HOA, I said, and you stated, publicly and officially, that my gate was illegally encroaching on community land. The officer closed the document slowly, looking between the two of us, and for the first time, her expression shifted just a little, not emotion exactly, but recognition of what this had become. Sir, she said to him, did you submit a formal complaint under your authority as HOA president? He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Yes, he said finally, quieter now. Because that's my responsibility. She nodded once, then turned to me. If you choose to invoke this clause, the easement would be considered void upon execution of a termination notice. I took a breath then, not because I was unsure, but because I understood the weight of what came next. This wasn't just about a gate anymore, or even about him. It was about a piece of land that had quietly supported the entire neighborhood's infrastructure for years without issue. Something I'd never used as leverage because there had never been a reason to, until someone decided to push. I looked past her, down the stretch of land where that easement ran, knowing exactly what was buried beneath it: fiber conduit, irrigation lines, lighting systems that fed into the community spaces, things no one thought about until they stopped working. Then I looked back at him, standing there in his spotless shoes beside a crumpled fender, and I wondered, briefly, if he understood any of that. I'd like to proceed, I said. The officer checked her watch, noted the time, and guided me through the process right there on the spot. The form was simple, straightforward, just a matter of acknowledging the clause and executing the termination. But the implications, those were anything but simple. As I signed my name, the pen moved smoothly across the paper. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just a clean, final line. Time of execution, 2:14 p.m., she said, making a note, and that was it. Just like that, something that had been in place for decades wasn't anymore. The air felt different after that, not heavier, not lighter, just changed, like the rules of the space had quietly shifted. He stood there for a moment, looking from me to the officer to the documents in her hand, and I could see it starting to register, the edges of the situation finally coming into focus. You can't be serious, he said, a hint of disbelief breaking through. That affects the entire community. I shrugged slightly, not dismissive, just honest. So did your claim. And for the first time since his car hit that gate, he didn't have anything to say back. The strange thing about consequences is they don't always arrive loud. Sometimes they just settle in quietly and start rearranging everything when no one's paying attention. And over the next few days, that's exactly what happened. At first, it was subtle. A contractor's truck idling longer than usual at the subdivision entrance, a delivery van backing out and trying again, drivers checking their GPS like it had suddenly betrayed them. And then slowly, word started to spread the way it always does, not through official notices or emails, but through conversations over fences, quick exchanges at mailboxes, the kind of low, steady current that carries information faster than any bulletin ever could. The access strip was gone, legally, clean and final, and with it went the most direct route to the clubhouse and half the shared systems the HOA relied on. So everything had to reroute, service vehicles looping around to the far road, adding time, fuel, coordination, and money. A lot of money. I didn't have to track it, didn't need spreadsheets or reports. You could feel it in the way the neighborhood shifted, small inconveniences stacking up until they weren't small anymore, and every single one of them traced back, whether people said it out loud or not, to that moment by my gate. I kept to my routine through all of it. Same porch, same coffee, watching the same stretch of gravel now temporarily open where the new gate would go, and I'd see those trucks pass by slower than before, drivers glancing over, some of them nodding, like they understood more than they were saying. About a week in, a couple of board members came by, not together, not officially, just stopping in, asking careful questions, trying to feel out where things stood. One of them, a guy named Martin who always looked slightly uncomfortable in his own clothes, stood at the edge of the driveway and said, "You know, if there's a way to revisit the easement, maybe come to some kind of arrangement." I let him finish, gave him the courtesy of that, and then I shook my head, not harsh, not angry, just firm. "That clause was there for a reason," I said, "and it got triggered. I didn't create that situation." He nodded, slow, like he already knew that was the answer, and after a moment he said, "People are frustrated." I took a sip of coffee, looked past him toward the road. Then they should probably talk to the person who made the claim. That conversation, or versions of it, happened a few more times, each one a little shorter than the last, until eventually they stopped coming altogether, not because the issue was resolved, but because it was clear it wasn't going to be undone. Meanwhile, his situation, well, that unraveled a lot faster. Insurance handled the damage to my property without much resistance, $9,200 to rebuild what he'd taken out, and I made sure the new gate was stronger, wider, the stone pillars reinforced with concrete this time, not because I expected another incident, but because once you've seen how quickly something can be tested, you build accordingly. As for him, the man who stepped out of that car so certain of his position, the one who thought authority meant control, the board called a meeting 2 weeks after the incident. I didn't attend, didn't need to, but I heard about it later from Mrs. Caldwell, who seemed to have a talent for being exactly where information was happening. "It wasn't pretty," she told me, leaning over the fence with that half-whisper people use when they want to sound discreet, but don't actually intend to be. "They went through the complaints, the costs, the legal exposure, and then someone brought up your easement." I could imagine the room, the shift in posture, the realization spreading from one person to the next that this wasn't just a mistake. It was a chain reaction set off by one decision made too quickly and defended too stubbornly. "They voted him out," she added, almost with a sense of satisfaction. "Unanimous." I nodded, not surprised, not particularly interested either, because by that point, whatever happened to him inside that structure he valued so much, it didn't really have anything to do with me anymore. Still, a few days later, I saw him again. He pulled up, not in the Bel Air, that was still in the shop I guess, but in something newer, quieter, and he didn't park near the gate this time. Kept a respectful distance, like the ground itself had changed meaning for him. He walked up the driveway slower than before. No hat, no performance, just a man trying to figure out how to stand in a moment that didn't go the way he expected. "I misjudged the situation," he said when he got close enough, hands in his pockets, eyes not quite meeting mine, and I escalated it further than I should have. It wasn't quite an apology, not fully, but it was closer than anything he'd offered that first day. I studied him for a second, not looking for sincerity so much as understanding. "Yeah," I said, simple, because sometimes that's all there is to say. He nodded once, like he'd reached the end of whatever script he'd come prepared with, and after a moment he added, "The board's working on alternative access, new infrastructure routes. It's going to take time." I glanced past him at the road, at the path everything now had to take. "Most things do," I said. We stood there in that quiet for a few seconds, not uncomfortable, not resolved either, just settled into what it was, and then he gave a small nod and turned back toward his car, walking away a little slower than he'd arrived. I watched him go, not with any sense of victory, but with the kind of clarity that only comes after everything's already played out, when you can see the whole shape of it from beginning to end. That gate, those pillars, the sign Linda painted, they were never just objects. They were markers of time, of care, of boundaries set and respected. And when someone decides those boundaries don't apply to them, well, sometimes the response isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, it's just precise. Now, every morning, I'm back on that porch, coffee in hand, the new gate standing solid at the end of the driveway, and the neighborhood still wakes up the same way it always has, just with a slightly longer route to get where it's going. And I think about how easily that day could have gone differently, how a simple, "I'm sorry," might have kept everything intact, but it didn't. And maybe that's the part that sticks with me the most, not the damage, not even the outcome, but the choice. So I'll leave you with this. If you were in his position, would you have handled it differently? Or do you think what happened was fair, given the way it all unfolded? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because in situations like this, where pride, property, and power all collide, the line between right and wrong isn't always as clear as people think, and I'm curious to hear where you'd stand.